So, as of late, it would seem as though Horikoshi, with the story of My Hero Academia, is gunning for the current shonen crown. This man wants to be atop the throne with his UA students, and it is apparent with his progression towards the inevitable war between the villains and the heroes that he has been setting up for several arcs now. With each preceding moment, the stakes become higher and higher as both sides rally their troops and bolster their strength and numbers in various ways. And right now, it looks like in order to make this clash as epic and monumental as possible, Horikoshi is drawing inspiration from some of the most ancient and highly revered articles of fiction known to man. Because right now, it is undeniable that the story of My Hero Academia is very much based on the Greek pantheon. Now, the reason I am able to say this with such confidence is because of just how forthright Horikoshi has been with some elements of his inspiration. However, some of these story elements are more so nuanced and require a certain understanding of the Greek pantheon in order to fully comprehend, which is where this video comes in. For instance, it would seem as though the primary source of his inspiration happens to be the war between the Olympian gods and the giants, in what was known as the Titanomachy, a title that quite clearly gave way to the naming of the hulking monstrosity of a villain we know as Gigantomachia. And it is my belief that by recognizing the commonalities between ancient Greek mythology and the current state of My Hero Academia, that we may be able to yield loads of information worth speculating and considering for the future. Now, mind you, with this video, we will be covering various plot points that have yet to make their way into the anime, and so if you are an anime only and you do not want manga spoilers, this is your time to exit. But now that that has all been established, let us begin. So, with the impending war between the heroes and villains being a representation of the Gigantomachy, I think it's important for us to establish which side is which. And with all that in mind, I believe the presence of the villains, with their defiance of the current state of the world and destructive capabilities, to be that of the giants, whereas the presence of the heroes, as the revered keepers of peace and prosperity, happen to be the Olympian gods. However, before we may fully understand the bout between the gods and the giants, we must first come to understand that which predated it, the war between the gods and the titans, otherwise known as the Titanomachy. Now, if you know anything about Greek mythology, you're probably well aware of this, but Zeus sat atop Mount Olympus as the king of the gods. However, he owed his existence to his titan father, Kronos, who, in fear of being usurped by the potential of his children, swallowed the gods whole, with Zeus surviving in secret, over time growing in power and eventually defeating his father and imprisoning him in Tartarus along with the other titans. And if it wasn't already painfully obvious, this story clearly mirrors the origins of One for All and its ever-long battle against All for One. For generations, All for One reigned supreme, and in order to keep his reign of terror going, he would slaughter anyone with a powerful quirk, as at some point they could potentially threaten his rule, all the while being obsessed with the potential of the power he had inadvertently created for his younger brother. However, because One for All was passed down from one person to the next, All for One could not successfully bring an end to this threat and was ultimately defeated and imprisoned in the maximum security villain prison, also known as Tartarus. And when considering the nature of One for All, we may subsequently quote the depiction of Zeus to represent all the possessors of the power, Deku and All Might included. In fact, the situation between Zeus and his father Kronos seemed to be a generational crux, seeing as how before this, Kronos also toppled his own father for the throne, and it was foretold that Zeus would at some point have a child that would succeed him in power. So I suppose that accounts for how One for All works when it comes to the stockpiling of power and such. But anyways, with the Titans held captive within Tartarus, the gods inherited the earth and would reign supreme with Zeus to hold the throne. Which is essentially the situation of All Might being both the #1 hero and a symbol of peace for decades, with hero society then becoming the superpower that it is today. However, of course, the story is not finished, because in retaliation against such change and the imprisonment of the Titans, Gaia, the primordial deity of the earth, gave rise to the giants as to disrupt this. And it's with this that Gaia comes to mirror the ingenious Dr. Ujiko and his insidious Nomu experiments. Having been responsible for the infamy and power of the Titans, Gaia was infuriated that the gods dared to imprison them. Now, the giants, like the Nomu, were described to be horrific creatures of immense power. So much so that when the gods came to face them, they were swiftly overwhelmed. The biggest issue being that the giants, having the battle on their lands and on their own terms, continuously rised up beyond death, serving to symbolize the fact that the Nomu are the undead corpses of the fallen, whether hero, villain, or civilian. And once again, Dr. Ujiko is the earth, so thanks to him, this continues to persist. But upon this realization, the gods shifted their approach and changed locations to circumvent this obstacle, which I believe will soon be the case in My Hero Academia's story, simply because the heroes will soon be on the trail of Dr. Ujiko thanks to the verbal message of the struggling Shirakumo, who said, "Hospital." Now, mind you, the presence of the giants are not fully encompassed by the Nomu alone, as the forces of the Paranormal Liberation Front make up their numbers as well. Now, one giant in particular that very much intrigues me would have to be the Hecatontries. Now, these were giants of immense power. I mean, this is a creature that had 100 arms and 50 heads, effectively placing them among some of the most powerful giants in existence. But interestingly enough, when it came to the Titanomachy, with their incredible power, they actually served the gods and fought against their giant brethren. And for me, I can't help but think about Twice. Now, although Twice may be in league with the villains of the story, he never comes across as overtly malicious or evil. In fact, he's more so of a fun-loving guy who just wants to protect his family despite who they may be. So I suppose you could argue that he is simply just caught up in the wrong crowd. And when it comes to his quirk, when he uses it properly, this man is a devastating power, a power that could topple entire nations. And so a force like that, like in the case of the Titanomachy, would be a substantial aid. But now, after saying Titanomachy so many times, I want to get into Gigantomachia. And interestingly enough, it would seem as though a fated battle between Kirishima and Gigantomachia is in order. And I say this not only because of the significance Machia's presence played in Kirishima's origin story, but also because it was prophesied that Heracles would be integral to their victory. Heracles, or more commonly referred to as Hercules, was known to be the strongest of the mortals, as he was a demigod. And I find that this relates to the fact that despite possessing a quirk, Kirishima's quirk, hardening, being as straightforward as it isn't necessarily a divine power, but one that he instead improves through hard work and determination, which I'd say is very much akin to the 12 labors of Heracles, which were feats of nearly impossible difficulty that served to establish him as a legendary hero. But even more than that, an indicating feature of Heracles, appearance-wise, was the massive lion's head which sat atop his own. Now, this beast was once the Nemean lion, a monster of unrelenting ferocity whose shimmering golden pelt was impervious to human weaponry and whose claws were sharper than blades. And with the first of his 12 trials, Heracles had slain it. And if you hadn't already noticed, the face mask of Kirishima's hero costume bears fangs within a jaw, with his spiked out hair bearing similarities to the mane of a lion, and obviously the lion's powers reflect that of his quirk. Now, at this point, the creatures Gaia alone had created were already a force to be reckoned with, But things would not stop there. The joined power of Gaia and Tartarus would then give rise to the world's greatest threat and the father of monsters, Typhon. Guys, Typhon was both a calamity and entity of such overwhelming power and destruction that with his presence alone, many of the gods were made to flee for Egypt in fear. Now mind you, Typhon's primary objective and the reason for his creation was to bring about the destruction of Zeus. And with that in mind, it is clear to me that Typhon stands to be Shigaraki. Brought to power through the shared efforts of All for One and Dr. Ujiko, Shigaraki has become one of the most influential and destructive forces the world has ever known. And from what we can tell from the manga right now, at some point, the heroes will vanish from the city, most likely due to the proceedings of his Paranormal Liberation Front. And that is terrifying, but what's even worse is that Shigaraki now knows of One for All thanks to the Doctor. Which is to say that the inevitable clash between Shigaraki and Deku is headed our way. Now, Typhon was a creature whose torso and head resembled that of a man, whereas the remainder of his body was pure monstrosity. Something that in the case of Shigaraki, I would attribute to the Doctor's recent experimentation. Now from here, the first time that Zeus and Typhon would clash, Zeus would be very much overwhelmed and outmatched by the might of Typhon. And with that, he was thoroughly defeated. And as a result, had his tendons cut, effectively rendering him powerless. And if I were to equate this to My Hero Academia, it makes a whole lot of sense. Because as it currently stands, even without modifications, as far as I'm concerned, Shigaraki would utterly destroy Deku. Not to mention that thanks to the failures of Overhaul, they were able to get their hands on a few vials of the quirk-destroying drug. So with that, it's quite possible that Shigaraki may go on to take Deku's power, reverting him back into what would otherwise be a helpless child. Now, it is at this point in Greek mythology that we go down the typical shonen route and rely on our friends, because Zeus is made to rely on the aid of his fellow gods. And when related to My Hero Academia, are really interesting ones at that. First off, we have Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, amongst other things. Now, the role she played in all this was twofold. Firstly, as an inspiration to her fellow gods to continue fighting the good fight, and secondly, as a motivator of Zeus to persevere. Now, if I'm being honest, Athena was probably the most difficult deity for me to find a comparison for, simply because of how much her character's depictions fluctuate. When it comes to inspiring Deku, I definitely consider her to represent Uraraka. However, she also provided Heracles, who we've established to be Kirishima, with major assistance during his 12 trials. And so in that way, she could be considered to be Mina, as Mina has been a driving force in Kirishima's journey and his backstory. But even then, without going into too much explicit detail in her Roman depictions, there Athena is made to be rather vindictive and irrationally malicious in ways that I'd liken to Toga. And so I'd moreover conclude her to represent the overall female presence of the story. Which, to be fair, as a shonen story, makes a whole lot of sense as to why they would put all their female characters into one bundle, I guess. Obviously not the best look, but it's what we get. But after Athena, we have Hermes, the god of many things. Hermes was essentially the prodigy of the gods. I mean, this guy was known for so many things, and even still was a master of them all. The god of wealth, travel, language, sleep, luck, thieves, and so much more. We could be here all day talking about what this guy was. But because of this, as a mortal, it was all but impossible not to worship him in some regard for something, which of course helped his popularity immensely. And to be fair, Hermes was kind of always this way. I mean, his mother was said to have given birth to him only a day after being impregnated, and that very same day, while his mother slept, he ran a great distance and stole some cows. So suffice to say, he was not only quick, but also a bit of a trickster, as speed and trickery were probably his most apparent features. Now, based on his visuals and the speed aspect of his character, my first knee-jerk representation idea was Ida, but the more I looked into the background and behavior of Hermes, the more it became abundantly clear to me that this was in fact Hawks. Hawks is referred to by Horikoshi to be a man who goes way too fast for his own good. Because I mean, at the young age of only 18, Hawks not only started his own hero agency, but also ranked amongst the top 10 heroes at the time in the very same year. And at the age of 22, managed to obtain the number 2 spot, all the while having never attended the prestigious UA high school. Personality-wise, he's proven himself to be rather mischievous even on serious occasions, but also is a genius tactician and double agent against the Paranormal Liberation Front. And amongst the general populace, this guy is really popular and charismatic. But to begin his heroic journey, despite having only been a child at the time, Hawks managed to save several lives at once during a high-speed car accident. But then of course we have the third god that Zeus was able to turn to in his state of desperation, who was Pan. Now, despite being a god, Pan was ridiculed and shamed by his own people for his ugliness, as his visage was that of a man combined with a goat. The situation was so bad, in fact, that his own mother had abandoned him as a child. And now, this may be skipping ahead a bit in terms of mythology, but Zeus would at a later point fully recognize Pan by consecrating him to be the god of the woods and plains. But it was only after his invention and masterful playing of the pan flute, an instrument comprised of reeds of varying sizes, that others were comfortable interacting with him despite his appearances. And the character closest to Pan in the story of My Hero Academia is quite certainly Eri. Having been abandoned by her mother due to what was considered to be a monstrous quirk, Eri was made to endure constant hardship prior to her being saved by Deku. And at this point in the story, the one thing keeping her away from a good life would be a lack of mastery over her quirk, Rewind. One that displays itself as a goat-like horn that varies in size. But now, with the combined efforts of Pan and Hermes, Zeus's tendons were recovered and the supreme god was able to regain his power. Which is to say that thanks to the inside knowledge and or diligence of Hawks, coupled with the controlled rewind abilities of Eri, Deku would be able to regain the power of One for All. And funny enough, at this point in the story prior to the war, Eri has all of a sudden begun her quirk training. Now, after having regained his power, Zeus finally confronts Typhon once more, this time exhausting every ounce of power at his disposal, and was eventually able to triumph in victory. He would then go on to imprison the now vanquished Typhon beneath Mount Etna, which was said to have become a volcano, with each eruption being Typhon attempting his escape. Now with this, I'd imagine that if Deku unleashed the full, unbridled strength of One for All, including all of his new quirks, and it at 100% and beyond, he would stand a chance and even be able to defeat Shigaraki. However, despite the case of the Olympian gods after the war reverting everything back to normal, I don't believe that will be the case with the world of My Hero Academia. The societal ramifications and implications that would come about from a battle like this, from a war like this, would not be able to be downplayed or forgotten. They would absolutely change the landscape of everything going forwards. And so, if nothing else, I'd imagine that the climax and or end and aftermath of all this will differ from the Olympian gods and the Greek mythology. Now, all of this information is certainly a whole lot to process and digest. And if I'm being completely honest with you guys, I'm not sure how to feel about all this in terms of Horikoshi's originality. The fact that he so heavily and severely borrowed from Greek mythology is a little strange and a little questionable for me. I mean, by no means do I consider this to be any sort of plagiarism, but the fact that so many things line up so heavily, I can't help but feel strangely about it. I mean, at this point, it feels like a rendition of a collection of stories that have been around for centuries. And so I am immensely curious how you guys feel about all this, because to me, I love Greek mythology. It is so cool. I also love My Hero Academia, as I'm sure you can tell, but to see that the parallels are this close does feel a bit strange. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, or at the very least were able to learn something new and appreciate the amount of effort, diligence, and research that went into bringing this video to you. And so if you are looking for more top of the line My Hero Academia content that you will not be able to get anywhere else on this platform, be sure to subscribe to Plot Armor because we have you covered. As always, I am Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.